Ballantine. And it's been a long time coming. What, like 9 months?
Yeah, I checked the other day and it was 9 months ago. And it's spooky season!
It's almost Halloween.
It's my favorite month.
We're on the road to Halloween, and you know what that means, Mr. Ballantine. Well, at least it does for us. You know, it's been a long time, but here we are. I found an interesting video of his that I really want to watch. It says, "The disaster you've never heard of is still controlling our timeline." And I think I have an idea of what he's talking about, and if I'm correct, it involves the Navy
I was going to say war.
and Indianapolis.
Indianapolis and the Navy.
I'm pretty sure. But don't try to think too hard on this. Let's let Mr. Ballin tell us the strange, the dark, the mysterious, and all the ways that he knows how. He's the man with the master plan. What is it? What's his name?
Mr. Ballin.
No. John
Mr.
D. Allen.
B. Allen, yeah.
That's right. Former Navy SEAL and Thief of Our Hearts, actually. We were one of the first channels to ever react to his stuff.
Yeah.
Which he actually commented on a couple of our videos in the past. He's a down-to-earth guy, appreciates reaction channels, which is something that I think is pretty cool. And I'm actually excited to see and hear him tell this story.
Yeah, I have no idea what that's about. Indianapolis.
You have no clue, do you?
Literally no clue.
Okay.
No.
Well, I think I have an idea, and I'm interested to hear what he has to say about it. So if you're ready, let's jump into some strange, dark, and mysterious.
Let's go.
One night in 1944, an American military pilot was flying over England when he turned around in his cockpit and looked at this panel of switches that was right behind him. And after looking for a particular switch, he reached out and he was about to toggle it, but he stopped because he knew what he was about to do, flipping this switch, would easily be the most dangerous thing he had ever done in his entire life. But this was his duty. He had to do it. And so after taking a deep breath, he flipped the switch, and immediately chaos ensued, and the course of American history would be drastically changed forever. If you've never heard the story before, and many people have not, this is not nearly as well known as it should be, then you are in for a huge reveal at the end.
You don't know?
But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please secretly log in to the Like Button's computer and then transfer all of their Bitcoin to your untraceable offshore account.
Nice.
Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
It's been too long. I have no idea.
Yeah, I know.
At around 5:30 p.m. on the evening of August 12, 1944, a young American military pilot named Joe walked out of his quarters on his base in England where he was stationed. And as soon as he was outside, he lit a cigarette to calm his nerves, and as he smoked the cigarette, he began walking towards the huge hangar on the other side of the base where his plane was waiting for him. Joe had been preparing for this night for weeks. He and his co-pilot, a 35-year-old lieutenant who was nicknamed Bud, were about to step off on a top-secret military mission called Operation Aphrodite. And this mission was not only top secret, but it was so unbelievably dangerous that basically anybody who knew about it considered it a suicide mission. But Joe tried not to think about that as he walked towards the hangar. Instead, he tried to think about the reason he was here in the first place, the reason he had joined the military, and that was to defeat the Nazis. And what he and his co-pilot were about to do, Operation Aphrodite, was going to play a huge role in defeating the Nazis. So this was about 5 years into World War II, and at this point, the Nazis were actually losing. However, it was making them more dangerous, not less, because they were becoming very, very desperate. And so they were launching all these outrageous attacks, basically because they had nothing to lose. And one horrible thing the Nazis were doing at this time were dropping these things called vengeance weapons. Hitler called them vengeance weapons. They were basically these huge bombs that the Nazis would drop arbitrarily across the United Kingdom on major population centers. And by this point in the war, these vengeance weapons had killed over 5,000 civilians. And at this exact moment, like this night, as Joe was walking towards the hangar, the Nazis had a stash of vengeance weapons aimed directly at London. That was going to be their next target. And so the mission that Joe and his co-pilot Bud were going on, Operation Aphrodite, was going to be to go out and destroy those vengeance weapons to save London. And as nervous as Joe was about this mission, and he was really nervous, he was also very excited. He actually had volunteered for this mission when many other pilots had done everything they could to stay away from this mission. And on top of that, Joe actually had flown enough missions by this point in the war that he didn't need to fly any more. He could just go home. But instead, he volunteered for this mission. And a reason why Joe might have decided to do that has a lot to do with the family he was raised in. So Joe came from a family that was very successful and accomplished, and his father really pushed Joe and his younger brother to be the very best at whatever they were doing and to be very competitive with each other. And so while Joe and his younger brother did love each other, they also had a pretty intense rivalry. And for a while, Joe's father obviously favored Joe. I mean, Joe was the favorite child, and, his father would always say, Joe's going to be the president someday. He's so talented. But after the attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the United States into World War II, both Joe and his younger brother joined the military, and pretty early on in the war, Joe's younger brother got an award for heroism. He had basically saved his platoon of men, and he won all these awards, and he was all over the news. And pretty quickly after that, Joe felt like he fell out of favor with his dad, that his dad kind of looked at the younger brother as being the favorite child now. And so Joe really started to feel insecure and wanted to prove himself really to his dad. And so when Operation Aphrodite came up, Joe volunteered for it really because he wanted to be a hero. He wanted to show his dad that he too could do something huge and change the course of history. And he would change the course of history, but not in the way he expected. And so Joe continued to smoke a cigarette and hustled across the base towards the hangar. And as he did, he found himself kind of speeding up, like he just wanted to get over there and get started. Joe's commanders had given him a special code he would call out over the radio if this mission was successful. It was spade flush. That's what he'd say over the radio. And so as Joe hustled towards the hangar, he imagined how incredible it was going to be to yell out spade flush over the radio. I mean, it was only like 30 minutes away from that moment. This was a short mission. And so finally Joe reached the hangar and he looked up to the sky one more time to make sure the weather looked solid, because actually they had tried to launch Operation Aphrodite a couple of days earlier, but it had been canceled because of fog. But Joe looked around and the weather looked good, and so he knew it was going to be a go. So he flipped his cigarette butt and stepped into the hangar. Inside this hangar was this massive, big open space. And in the center of the hangar on the floor was this huge plane called a B-24 Liberator. This was, of course, Joe's plane for the night. And so Joe immediately began walking towards the plane to check it out. Now, this particular type of plane was the type of plane Joe had been flying for the past 3 years. I mean, he'd flown many combat missions in this type of aircraft, so he was very familiar with it. But this particular B-24 was unlike any of the other B-24s Joe had ever flown. In fact, this aircraft was so unique, it was unlike any aircraft that any pilot in the American military had ever flown. I mean, this was really a one of one. And so as Joe walked around the outside of this plane, he began to notice some of these unique modifications that the mechanics had made to this aircraft. The most noticeable modification was actually the cockpit. Now, normally the cockpit had all these windows basically all around it, so the pilot could look in any direction and see what was going on, but obviously they needed to be protected from the elements. But this B-24 had all the glass removed except for one pane of glass, basically right in front of where Joe would be staring, just like a single windshield. And so it's almost like it was a convertible aircraft where it was all open air in the cockpit. And the reason for this change is because Joe and his co-pilot, during the course of this top secret mission, Operation Aphrodite, they would have to jump out and parachute to the ground. And so by having this all open, it would allow them to do that much easier. And then another big modification to the B-24 is the guns that were normally located on the outside of the aircraft were gone, and they were replaced by broomsticks painted black to look like guns at a distance. But the visible changes to this particular B-24 were nothing compared to the massive changes that were hidden inside this aircraft. Because the top secret part of Operation Aphrodite was really this particular plane. The plane was not really a plane, it was more like a huge flying bomb. The military's mechanics basically hollowed out the entirety of this plane, removed everything inside of it that was not absolutely vital, and they replaced it with explosives. 10 tons of explosives. Like, this
gosh.
is an unbelievable amount of explosives.
Okay, so I'm making sense
A few
now.
minutes later, at around 5:55 p.m., Joe and his co-pilot Bud, who by this point had come into the hangar, finished doing their exterior inspection of the aircraft, and then they climbed into the cockpit, with Joe taking a seat in the pilot's seat and Bud sitting in the co-pilot's seat. And even though the evening was cool, both men were visibly sweating. Once the
No
pilots
shit.
got the go-ahead to begin the mission, Joe fired the first engine and then turned to look at the ground crew all around them, and he noticed all of them looked really, really serious. I mean, they obviously knew how intensely dangerous this mission really was, and the fact was, you know, the pilots might not make it home, and so they're looking up at these guys like, I'm sorry you have to do this. But Joe, you know, he looked out at these people and he sensed that was going on, and so he made a big show to wave and smile at them, to show confidence, like he knew what he was going to do, he's going to be fine. But in reality, Joe really was terrified. In about 10 seconds, I'm going to hold something up in front of the camera that our team has been working on for over a year, and it's finally ready to be revealed, and we know you're going to love it. All right, drum roll please, here we go. And it's The Strange, Dark, and Mysterious,
Oh.
delivered in book format.
That's
the
cool.
official Mr. Ballin graphic novel, our first
Pretty
book
sick.
ever. In this just stunningly beautiful anthology of stories are full stories that are brand new and have never been covered anywhere
be a
else
good
on
Christmas
any of our
gift.
other channels. So if you want to hear those new stories, you got to get this book. The book is not coming out until my birthday, October 1st of this year. But
Oh, just
you
a
can
couple
pre-order
days
it
ago.
right now by going to book.ballinstudios.com.
We're promoting it.
Yeah.
The link is also in the description. And if enough of you pre-order this thing, it'll make the New York Times bestseller list, which is so cool. But more importantly, that will show us there's big interest in books from the strange, dark, and mysterious community.
Very cool.
And we'll make more of them. So again, head on over
that's
to
a cool birthday.
book.ballinstudios.com and pre-order a copy today. Oh, and also at the end of today's video, be sure you stick around because I'm going to go live on YouTube, and during this live event, I will tell you a little personal story from my time in Navy boot camp and how that actually led to the creation of this graphic novel. I'll also speak with some very special people that helped make this book a reality, and I'll share some other exclusive details about the book. Oh, and also I will answer any questions you might have about the book. So when this episode ends, just click on the live tab
Very
on my
cool.
YouTube channel to join the live event with me. And again, go to book.ballinstudios.com and pre-order a copy of the Mr. Ballin graphic novel today.
So if you didn't
and help us
know-
get on that New York Times
Now you
bestsellers
know.
list.
Because we didn't know.
Tell him, Sushi.
By 5:59 p.m., Joe had all 4 propellers spinning on the aircraft, and so he released the brake and began taxiing out to the runway. And as they bumped along, Joe and Bud became really aware of just how heavy this aircraft was from all the explosives. I mean, every bump, this plane is lurching up and down and really creaking and making lots of noises. I mean, this was sketchy. Finally, Joe went full speed ahead, and he and Joe went tearing down the runway, and at some point, the plane did get lift, and it took off into the air. And then just up ahead of him were 6 other planes that had just taken off moments before, who were going to escort Joe and Bud to their target area.
Okay.
Once Joe got the plane to its cruising altitude, he and Bud kind of relaxed for a second and began preparing themselves for what was going to happen next. They had about 15 minutes of just kind of casual flying before the real work of this mission began.
Dude, that's a
The
long time
vengeance
to feel
weapons
that
that Joe
way.
and Bud
For
were
real.
going out to destroy as part of Operation Aphrodite were located about 120 miles south, just outside of this little town in the very northern tip of France. But destroying these weapons would not be as simple as just Joe and Bud flying over top and releasing all their explosives and flying back home. Because the Nazis had buried these vengeance weapons deep inside the hills in this town in northern France. And so regular bombs wouldn't touch these vengeance weapons. They had to do it a different way. And the way they were going to do it was Joe and Bud were going to fly their plane directly into the hills. And the way they would do this is they would fly their plane as close to the target
And then
area as
jump.
possible, at which point one of the other pilots that were in the escort planes would take remote control of the B-24 flying bomb.
Wow.
And then once they had remote control, Joe and Bud, who no longer needed to do anything, they would jump out and parachute to the ground, and then the pilot who was remotely flying this now vacant
Okay, made
B-24
it.
flying bomb, they would just set it on autopilot to crash into the hills. At around 6:15 p.m., just as the English Channel came into view, Joe toggled a switch on his control panel, and then after he did, he and Bud kind of held their breath for a second to see what would happen. And then a couple of seconds later, the plane kind of shuddered for a second and then leveled out. And then a call came over the radio from one of the pilots who were in the escort planes telling Joe and Bud that they had just successfully taken remote control of the B-24.
Okay.
So at this point, Joe and Bud are no longer
is so
flying the
wild.
aircraft. They're just sitting
I didn't
inside
know
of
that
this
that was an
flying
option.
bomb. Now, there were only two things left for Joe and Bud to do before they could bail out to safety. They would need to arm the plane, so basically arm the explosives and make them ready to detonate. And then after that was done, they would need to call out over the radio, spade flush, the
yeah.
code Joe was given,
already
which
forgot
would
about
signal
that.
to everybody
See,
else
I couldn't
that
do
the
it.
plane was ready and Joe and Bud were jumping out. And so once Joe and Bud nodded to each other and kind of acknowledged that, okay, we're going to do the last bit of this mission, Joe turned around in his seat and he looked at this control panel that was right behind him, and on this panel was the arming switch. And so once Joe flipped this, he and Bud would have a very short window of time to safely escape the aircraft. And so it was kind of like, flip it, make the radio call, and get the heck out of there. But Joe and Bud had trained for this moment over and over and over again, so they were ready. And so eventually, Joe flipped the switch, grabbed his radio, and called out, "Spade flush." What Joe and Bud could not have known when the mechanics were making all these modifications to this B-24 was that one of the mechanics accidentally crossed some wires in putting in all these explosives. And so just seconds after Joe had armed the
It went off.
explosives, they detonated. They were not supposed to, but they did. And so Joe and Bud were killed basically a fraction of a second after calling out "spade flush." But it would turn out the catastrophic failure of Operation Aphrodite had no impact on World War II. In fact, Operation Aphrodite should never have happened in the first place. It was totally unnecessary. What Joe and Bud and the rest of the American military didn't know at the time was 5 weeks earlier, the British Royal Air Force dropped a whole bunch of ground-penetrating bombs all across those hills in northern France, and they destroyed all of the vengeance weapons. So when Joe and Bud took off on this doomed mission, there was no threat to London. None. But that is not the big reveal in this story, because Operation Aphrodite changed the course of American history in a really specific and really enormous way. Because Joe, whose full name was Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., was a member of the very famous Kennedy family, a big-time political family in America, and at the time, the Kennedys were all saying, Joseph is going to be the next president of the United States. And everybody believed it. He was going to be the guy. But then, of course, Operation Aphrodite changed all of that because Joseph was killed. And so the war would end about a year later, and when it did, Joseph's younger brother, John F. Kennedy, who won that award for heroism and got a Purple Heart early on in the war, and he kind of became a war hero, which prompted Joe to volunteer for Operation Aphrodite. Yeah, John would begin his unbelievable political rise. And by 1960, John F. Kennedy, JFK, would become the 35th president of the United States, even though he wasn't supposed
Holy
to. He was
shit.
the second choice. It should have been Joe.
I had no clue that had ever happened. And how fucking shitty is it to go out there risking your life on some kind of crazy mission with remote controlled explosive
that's crazy.
aircraft and all this shit for no reason?
Look, I'm going to say something, and maybe it's going to come across the wrong way because it's not very nice in my brain, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway. Like, maybe if your dad just loved you a little bit more, you wouldn't have went on this crazy, stupid mission anyway.
Look, this was
I know, it's
his-
different.
the way he felt about the situation. And you also can't judge how people were in a different type of, like, we've grown up in
That's
different
true.
societies.
That's true.
Things were different
It's
back
different.
then. It is what it is. All I know is, number one, the balls on this guy.
Oh my god.
Okay. Number two, he was
15 minutes of
seems like
just-
an eternity, I'm sure.
oh my god.
But anybody who's going to put their life on the line for hopefully a better future
Hold on.
for the world,
Just turn around. Oh, I think he went on autopilot
hear
for
me?
a second. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. Chuchi's cute. Look at him. Look at him. Every time you look at him, he stops. Just watch him. Just watch him. He just goes on autopilot and just goes. Do you see him? He's yawning when you look at him. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
Blooper reel. Anyway, anybody who puts the betterment of the future and the world and hope for humanity above their self and sacrifices their own life
Agreed.
in the advancement of that goal, I mean, what do you say about that? If you think you're doing a good thing and you risk your neck for other people, I mean, that's valor, that's bravery, that's selflessness on a scale that I can't imagine. You know, I would like to think that I would make that kind of choice, but
Right.
it's easy to say.
Sure.
Harder to be in 1944 when how long had planes even been a thing?
Right,
To load one with
autopilot,
explosives,
Remote
Trust-
control.
some technology that who knows how reliable it was. Obviously, it wasn't reliable.
I'm
It didn't
surprised they
fucking
let
work.
him do that. Like, oh, you're a
Oh.
Kennedy. Like, that would never happen now.
But look, in the 40s, fighting the Nazis and going and being, it's not like it is now. Like, people really respect military members and things now. Back then, you were saving the world. You were a superhero
Literally.
if you were fighting in World War II. I mean, it's a whole nother thing. We can't even
I
imagine.
can't. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's wild. But JFK, John F. Kennedy Jr., or
Oh,
no,
My, no.
the senior. There's no telling.
Are you talking about their dad?
I'm talking about JFK from this, the brother,
I don't think that was his name.
JFK, John F. Kennedy.
That's his brother.
Joe is the guy who died in this video. John is.
Oh, I guess it is JFK. Yeah.
JFK
Oh, okay. Yeah,
was
you're.
his younger brother
Yeah.
who went on to become president, was assassinated. Some people say that
Right.
it was, something to do with,
Little sus.
communism. Some people say it was the CIA. Some people say it was this, that, and the third.
That one dude.
Aliens. Like, who knows what really
I've never heard
happened.
the alien theory.
I was just joking.
Okay.
But there's tons of conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination. But he went on, I mean, he was a beloved president. Whenever he was president, people were really happy with him. He did have his failures. He was the president, which you all know I'm like kind of not the biggest fan of the federal government. It is what it is. But like the course of history changed that day. When JFK was assassinated, it was around the Vietnam era and all that kind of stuff. Like, this was at a time period where people really started believing in conspiracy theories. The federal government was losing the trust of the population, and it had been a couple of presidencies or presidential terms
Prior.
where that had started to formulate, but right around the time JFK got assassinated, like, conspiracy theories and shit just shot up to the moon, no pun intended. But
My grandmother would say otherwise.
right, I mean, it's like people started questioning the moon landing, rightfully questioning what started Vietnam and how that was a farce. But like, who killed JFK? Like, all of this shit was happening right at the same time. You also had like the first like big national murder mystery true crime shit happening in the United States with
yeah.
the rise of serial killers and shit at this time being like a thing. And it like, there was so much that changed in the 60s, in the early 50s or late 50s and mid to the mid 60s, that were just like fucking crazy, that blasted the conspiracy theory shit. Like, yeah.
Now I'm starting to think, like, did this dad outlive both of his sons? And like, even though they had like this little rivalry and stuff, like now they're just both gone.
Well, I don't know, but I
Yeah.
do know that the Kennedy family is just like tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. I mean, even
And we didn't even know about this.
Even the youngest brother, Robert Kennedy,
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy, he was assassinated also.
Man,
You know, I mean, the list goes on.
that's crazy.
Um,
That's some bad juju somewhere. Something.
Even JFK Jr., I'm pretty sure, died tragically. That, you know, just like family curses are a thing
Right.
people talk about when it relates to the Kennedys, Bruce and Brandon Lee. You know, there's like family curse thing also that people believe in. But man, what a fate. What a fate. You know, I thought about this, you know, while we were watching the video, and I started to kind of see what was going on. Like, the Japanese army, they had no issue with just using kamikaze pilots.
Right.
They were like, show them that we don't give a fuck, and we will do whatever it takes to win this war,
Yeah.
including self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was just a thing that happened
It was like
a lot. In this, even in some of the most dire circumstances, the American military was using every end to do something
not.
similar, but to try and make sure that the pilots were able to escape, live to see another day. So it's just the question comes up often of like, were the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was that really necessary? And to me, it's a really difficult thing because you got to take stuff in perspective that we don't even think about. Like, Japan, from a national level, had said over and over again that we are fighting to the last
Person.
woman and
Yeah.
child, even. Like, you will have to exterminate all of us to win. Like, good luck. Whereas our mentality was, let's get these pilots out of here with one mission, with one run. Like, anything we have to do, like the cutting edge technology, we've got to use it.
Yeah.
Instead of how many untold amount of money did they, how many dollars did they spend on that
Trying to
project,
formulate,
just
yeah.
trying to save those two men,
Yeah.
in comparison to, you've been chosen, bye.
And it was like an honor.
Well, I mean, shit, dude.
right?
Like dying for your country, even to us, is seen as an honor.
Yeah, but like to be specifically that,
They
to be
were
chosen
like,
for that is like, well, you're gonna die. That sucks really bad. You know, I'm sure that you have
But
your
it's
own
for
humanity,
God.
but
God and country were one thing.
right, because like if I don't know, I just keep comparing it to like how I would feel. So it's just not.
You just can't.
I know.
You just can't, because
Yeah.
it's a whole different mindset. And so it's like, I sit here and think about the death and the destruction involved with dropping those bombs, and it's like, I mean, it's horrible. It seems like one of the most horrible things that you could ever do. But it ended the war. Like, that was it. Once that happened, it was over. How many more people would have died had that not happened?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I'm
it's
saying?
so hard.
It's like, it's one horrific event or another series of horrific events.
Yeah.
War is just ugly, you know? But it just makes you think. Like, the mindset of our military was to spend all of these resources to just try and save those
Yeah,
two
and
guys.
like who knows if it's gonna work, but at least we're gonna try.
At least we're going to try to make sure they can come home. Whereas, you know, as sad as it is to say, the value of human life on the side of the Imperial Japanese was, I mean, it's an expendable resource. Yeah. Crazy to think. World War II is one of those things that just pits a lot of different, you can go into economics, strategy as far as like warfare is concerned on several different fronts and battlefields and all of this, but there's that crazy overarching, like, you know, ethical umbrella over the whole thing. So yes, Shorty has been crying because he's not in the room right now because
Yeah.
his farts are so bad. Just in case he's outside the door.
I was like, I don't want to address this, but also like, I don't want you guys to just think that I'm like laughing at what Chad is saying, because if you can't hear Shorty, then it would just seem like that.
He's pitching a fit outside the door, but he was smothering us with his nuclear farts.
Oh, Chad. Gosh.
Anyway, thank you guys for checking out this reaction. Mr. Ballin, badass as always. It's been a long time. Hopefully we'll get into some more of these. And thank you guys for showing up. And we know it's been a while.
If you have
And
suggestions for Mr. Ballin or anything else, put it down in the comments below.
appreciate you guys.
Thanks.
See you next
See you.
time.